Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 68 of IGEL Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. Today is December 6th, 2022. I've got Patrick Toner with me. Patrick, how's it going?
It's going good. Going good. It's a little sad to hear you say December 6th. It's like as soon as I get used to writing 2022 on forms and things like that, that's when the year changes. So
Oh, man, I can't write a check to save my life. I can't write the numbers. I can't sign my name. I can't I can't write, period, in a legible way. And then the dates, I have to look every time to see what date it is. And half the time it's what month it is. And sometimes it's what year it is. I can't even, it's insane.
I hear you. I hear you. It's very, maybe it's because we just don't write that stuff as much. I don't know what it is. Growing up in school, you probably wrote it every day, right? Now technology kind of doesn't, we don't have to do that. It's all done for us.
That's a great example of how technology has helped us, right? I mean, you don't have to write your name. I heard somebody talking about writing their name on the top of their paper. Nobody does that anymore. It's all part of your digital footprint, and that's good. But what if you had to write your name? Like I go to Witch, and the idea to have to write my name on a little piece of paper, I forget to fill it out.
Yeah, I mean, our names are on our email signatures, and then even that stuff. Every company goes through this phase where they're like, hey, we have like 100 different email signatures. We need to standardize. That's how little we think about it. We really don't look at it. We don't think about it.
Well, and that's an interesting conversation too, because we had res and absence and profile unity and the thing, whatever Citrix bought, that made all that, follow you kind of around, but it never quite got to the finish line. And I don't think Microsoft even has it where your Outlook, your Exchange footprint actually has your signature tattooed into that. So I work from 3 virtual desktops, 4 laptops. I'm all over the place all the time, and I'm constantly having to copy my signature from somewhere else and put it in.
Yeah, it is definitely. Well, that's the thing for sure. Microsoft, if you're listening, we need that fixed, or someone needs to develop it. There we go.
And there may be an answer for that already. I just don't know it.
Yeah, same here. I wrestle with that one as well, for sure.
Well, Patrick, thanks for joining us. Just you and I today. We picked an article. Let me pull it up on the screen so you and I can talk through it. Around Firefox. It's an older blog, but the name of it is How to Restrict Firefox to a List of Designated URLs. Looks like maybe Joseph Mason asked the question in the IGEL community. And let's see, can we tell who actually responded here to this?
Well, speaking of names and signatures, I was just going to say, this sounds like Seb wrote it, but I don't see his name anywhere. But I'm pretty sure this is Seb's writing.
Okay.
Just it reads like Seb when he says, "I must confess, his solution is quite articulate."
Yeah, that probably is true.
That's Seb.
So help me understand this. Why is this important? Why is it important to, I guess, first maybe take an IGEL OS and lock it down to where it's browser only, or maybe not browser only, but when it relates to the browser, you want it to go to one place and one place only. Why is it important?
Yeah, it really comes down to, security and security policies in your company. I've had this request many times over the years. And at one point, the answer was, there's really not a way to do this at the OS level. And there probably was a way. Obviously, the scripting probably would have worked back then. But many customers would do this not at the OS level, but maybe they would, block it at the firewall level internally or whatever they're doing. But the one thing that's changed a lot is, end users have gone home and more people are working remotely. They're working remotely either full-time or maybe a few days a week coming back into the office. So doing it at the firewall level, that's only going to really affect you when you're in the office. Once you go home, it's wide open. So there is more of a need now to restrict this at the operating system level. This is really a great way to do it. To basically, no matter where the user is, whether they're in the office, at home, or at Starbucks or whatever, they can only hit a few different URLs from their company assigned device.
So is this a security or productivity need, or both?
Wow, that's a good point. I guess it could be both. I mean, if you don't want your end user scrolling Facebook and TikTok and everything else all day, it could absolutely be productivity. I mean, I think it definitely plays into both categories. For sure, you don't want any malicious type websites coming into the mix, especially on company property. And yeah, productivity for sure, without a doubt, that plays into it.
And just for clarification, it looks like Seb wrote the blog, but Joseph asked the question and then found the answer to his own question. And that's what the blog is addressing here.
Okay.
Now, it starts off with the kind of the comment from Joseph around doing what we all as IT admins who understand how DNS works could possibly do, which is to go in and just modify the host file so that the only place it can get to is resolve the name. But that's not a real security approach. That's just kind of what do we call that? Security through obscurity kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. But then he points out the ability to launch the app, pointing it to a JSON file. Wait a minute. Okay, so
Yep.
I'll let you, as the more technical guy here, what was the solution Joseph came up with?
Well, you had it exactly right. It's a script. So, in the IGEL operating system, I'm not looking at the UMS in front of me. So usually I have it up. It's in the system area. You can put custom commands into the operating system. And there's all these different sections. There's sections where the OS is starting up. There's sections, they call it the desktop initialization phase. It's the last thing that happens as the OS finalizes. So that's one thing to, from a timing perspective, when you're doing scripting in IGEL OS, which category or which section you put it in matters. But at the end of the day, what you're really talking about is the Linux script. It's using the sed command, SED. And what it's doing is it's really just looking at a JSON file and it's editing it.
Okay,
it's putting exceptions in.
So Firefox, you and I were talking about Chromium versus Firefox a while ago. Firefox has a long history of being a very robust, let's call it maybe work-worthy enterprise browser. And it comes with a JSON file, which is really a file that's used to, at least at startup, control applications like Firefox.
That's right. And I'm almost certain the same is true for Chrome and Chromium. They also have a JSON file that has the same function. So I guess in theory, you could do something similar with Chromium or Chrome, the way he's doing it here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the JSON file is going to, if you look at the way it's written here, it's telling the browser to block everything, and then it's saying except for these exceptions. So it's saying, hey, it's using this command /n block all URLs, and then exceptions, and it has google.com. So in this scenario, only google.com would work. But you could create a list, hey, maybe I want these 10 business websites that my users use. They can access these, but absolutely nothing else.
And chances are you go into this JSON file, whether it's for Chromium or Firefox, you'll find all kinds of things about full screen mode or partial screen mode, or I don't know, the different tools in the toolbar being available or not. It's probably pretty powerful if you went through there and looked around. Yeah,
I mean, every type of custom thing like this that customers have asked in the past, it's usually editing a JSON file for the browsers. It's extremely powerful. And really a lot of the IGEL profile, when you look at the Firefox settings, it's most likely just making a change in that file, but you're just doing it with an easy GUI instead of scripting.
Well, in this case, it looks like, okay, so are they setting a script that runs every time that goes in and modifies or makes sure that entry is modified versus going in and maybe editing the text file and then making it part of the image? I guess in an IGEL world, can you go in and edit the JSON and leave it modified for the base image, or do you need to go in and touch it every time the machine comes up?
Yeah, it's a great question, Eddie. I mean, really, the answer is no. You can't just edit the file, and the reason for that is IGEL is a sandbox operating system. So every time you reboot the OS, it's whatever's in that JSON file by default, it's going to default back to it. So the way you would do this is you would copy this script and edit it as you would need, and you would put it into one of those sections in an IGEL profile. So I don't know which one there. I don't see a recommendation, but desktop initialization, a final desktop command is probably where I would put it. Basically, every time the OS boots, it's the last command that runs, and then as you launch your Firefox browser, that change is already made in that JSON file. So it keeps it. It keeps the changes. That they stay in effect even after a reboot, because you have a sandbox OS that's necessary.
Yeah. So they don't get tattooed in effect. You're just manually, you're automatically through the UMS telling it this is what you're going to do every time you come up.
Yep, absolutely. You know,
And
every time.
that's the power of just the concept of the sandboxed OS. That's the power of a true enterprise Linux operating system. That's the power of a centralized management solution. It's really the IGEL story kind of in a nutshell. And in this case, it's all about something as simple as a browser, but something as powerful as a browser.
Yeah, and I think too, it shows the power, you know, of knowing scripting, right? That's ultimately, if you want to become an IGEL wizard, right? The more you can learn about Linux scripting, the better, because there's just so much you can do if it's outside the lines of what's built into the UMS. There's already a lot of settings there. It's over 7,000, but if you know how to script and you know some basics about Linux,
Yeah.
it's really powerful.
Yeah, this is so interesting to me because I've got this 20-year-old son. I don't know whether to send him down the SaaS route or into the cloud world or into scripting. I mean, scripting, no matter which direction you go, it is super valuable for this kind of runtime code power management or management.
Yeah, I think Linux is, and I'd be curious on your thoughts on this, Andy. I mean, I think knowing Linux now, there's just more and more systems, back end, front end, moving to Linux. That's probably a great place for any young person who wants to get into, technology. But to your point, scripting is it's huge. I remember when I was working in healthcare, there was one guy, he was like a PowerShell scripting whiz, and everybody would go to him. I mean, he was talking about job security, that that hospital would go down without the guy.
Yeah. Well, and I actually have this in my background. I was becoming an AIX administrator, Unix at one point, and I was playing with Linux. And then I got a job at Microsoft doing support for a couple of years. And then around that time, Microsoft brought PowerShell forward because they realized that having a real shell was going to be super powerful in the enterprise space or in the business world. So they went from kind of a consumer operating system to a true business operating system, multi-user scripting, true shell behind it. And honestly, for me, I think that's what's happened. I think the Linux world, the Unix world became the Linux world to some degree. And the Microsoft world started thinking shell was important as well. Therefore, scripting became a real thing instead of batch file stuff that was going on. And then now all these worlds, if you really want to be a powerful, strong entity in the configuration, because think about it, you have a UI that somebody can design that can do X number of things, but at a script level, at a shell level, you could do 100 times those things you couldn't fit on a screen or design in a UI.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of what we're talking about, right? We're talking about, an operating system with a UI that has so many little, levers. I mean, 20 something years worth of development, and there's still need at times to custom script something. Even when you're talking about a solution like this that just has like 7,000 things you can change in the UI, there's going to come a point where you need that 7,005, 7,006.
Yeah.
You need those things outside the bounds.
You can't fit all those things in a UI. Nobody has time to design a UI to do all that. So therefore, if you want to do the superficial level stuff, then you use the UI. If you want to get deeper, or like in this case, script it and schedule it, well, you can't do that in a UI.
Yeah, well, you can in this UI. I guess schedule it. You schedule it, at boot, but it's not, But yeah, most of the time that's not going to be.
Well, no, I mean, nobody's sitting there every time the machine comes up to click, click, click. You've got to write it into a script via the power of the shell and then stick that into the UMS, maybe through a UI, but then at that point, you're just pointing to a script or some type of command that's going to run each time.
Yep.
Yeah, super powerful. So if you're 70 years old or 20 years old and you plan to be relevant in IT for the next, forever, go understand shells and go and learn how to script, and you'll make yourself a valuable resource.
Yeah, and if you're an IGEL person, join the community, and you'll see the people in that community that have the most valuable feedback, who constantly come up with solutions. They're the ones who they know Linux scripting, and there's never been a better time. I mean, there's all these different training platforms. You can pay a monthly fee, and an expert will walk you through it. There's really never been a better time to learn this type of stuff. You do it from the comfort of your home and never have to leave, and just have somebody walk you through it. So it's great stuff.
So Patrick, if you had to start learning a shell language tomorrow, which one would you start with?
Yeah, if I had to start one, it would either be I would either really want to know PowerShell. PowerShell's touches so many things.
Mhm.
And I just think about my background a little bit, some roles I've worked in. You look again, making the analogy of, the example of the guy I worked with in healthcare, he just took a lot of time. He was self-taught, and he knew PowerShell scripting really well. And he was super valuable. I think PowerShell is probably going to be the most, the most used. So that's probably a good place to start for anybody.
And
How about
I
yourself?
agree. Well, so I was coming up in the AIX world at one point, and I was learning Corn Shell, which is similar to Bash. But then I started going the Microsoft route because that's where I got my next set of jobs, and that's when I started to become aware of PowerShell. And then we did a podcast yesterday around the Citrix stuff, and it was about Linux. And I didn't realize until then how much effort had gone into bringing PowerShell over to the Linux world. That way it becomes a ubiquitous thing. So whether it's maybe Azure, or whether it's a Linux OS, or whether it's Windows, or whether it's maybe AWS, I'm not sure about the Google guys at this point, but PowerShell would be one that I would go down the route of. That's, again, with my 20-year-old son, I'm trying to figure out, okay, where do I point him? And there's so many things to point him at, but if you could learn how to write, and if you could learn PowerShell and how to use it for the commands and the commandlets, and then turn around and be able to put that into a script and then schedule that script, then you're on your path to being a well-paid person in technology for many, many years to come.
Yeah, totally agree.
And you can impress the hell out of your friends too.
That's true. Well, not all your friends, but at least your technical friends. They'll be very impressed.
I would say even some of your non-technical friends are like, hey, you do this, watch this, just type it out and hit send, and this beautiful thing of messaging going across the screen happens, and they think you're a genius, and all you did was type a little command with a switch or something on it, or a command lit.
Yeah, I think we've had this discussion about impressing our wives with these things. I'm pretty sure if I tried to show my wife PowerShell scripting, she would probably fall asleep. I think for there was years she really couldn't explain what I did for a living.
Well, mine still can't.
Yeah.
He works on computers. That's it.
That's it. The computers is that, that's very simple, very basic.
Computers, and he makes all the payments on all the stuff around here. That's all that matters.
There you go. Two very important things.
Yeah. All right, sir. Well, I appreciate the time and good discussion, and we'll pick a topic and do it again next week.
Great. Thank you. Have a good one, everybody.
Good rest of your week. See you.
You too. Bye-bye.